Good morning, guys, and welcome back to Between the Ropes TV. Now, we've got a treat. Finally, myself and Ray, we're back on the same video. How you doing, Ray?
I'm brilliant. Well refreshed. Batteries are recharged. How about yourself?
I'm all good, mate. Glad to be back doing this with you.
Yeah, definitely.
So, right, let's jump into this one. Last night, obviously, as we all know, Buatsi Richards card, and it was a good card from top to bottom. But we'll jump
Excellent
in.
card.
It really was. We'll jump in at the main event. For those that don't know, Joshua Buatsi won with a unanimous decision. Now, the scorecards for me were a little too close, Ray. How did you feel about this one?
I had the fight the same as two of the judges, 115, 130 in favour of Buatsi. Um, Buatsi won the first round. Richard started that first round very, very well. He used his jab, but instead of creating distance, he started to shorten his distance. He would use his jab to find his way in, and then Buatsi, halfway through the round, kind of timed him. Not rocked him, but put him back on his heels a bit. And I thought Richards won the second round, and Buatsi kind of won every single round up until round 7 in my book. And then I had Richards winning 7, 8, 9. And then, not sure, can't remember 10, but I had Buatsi winning 11 and 12. I think I might have gave Buatsi round 10. But I definitely, on my scoring app, I definitely had Buatsi winning by the 2 rounds. I just thought that it was one of those fights where Richards showed more. Richards was he had the more effective jab at some points of the fight, and in the middle rounds where I started to give more rounds to Richards, it was because Richards was doing this thing of throwing his jabs in ones and twos, and then dipping his shoulders either to his left and right, following up with a backhand, a single shot with a backhand, or single shot with a left hook, and it was effective and it was working. But Buatsi had the harder shots. Buatsi's shots would rock Richards back. He would land combinations. Yeah, and because he made more effective work on his body, you can argue he was a more effective aggressor in that fight. So it comes down. There was a couple of fights on this card. It just came down to what style you liked, and I think this was one of the 3 fights that did that for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I personally had it 116, 112. I gave the second round. I agree with most of what he said, but I did give the second round to Buatsi as well. I just thought some of the more landed work came from Buatsi. But again, in fairness, there was a couple of rounds. I thought the 12th round, in fairness, I was a bit, that could have possibly gone Richards' way as well. So I would agree with you. It was a little bit of a, as you say, pick which one you prefer.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely, thank God, wasn't one of these fights that we've had recently where there's uproar about the result. So I suppose it sort of begs the question, what's next? Obviously, Eddie Hearn's talking about if Canelo fights Triple G, he'd love to bring Bivol over. I'm going to be possibly controversial for me. I think it's too soon for Buatsi. I think that's what we saw last night. I think I agreed with Tony Bellew beforehand. I think we needed to see a statement win from whoever did win. And not that Buatsi didn't deserve the win. I think he obviously did. But I think what it's shown is he's definitely 1 or 2 shy of, jumping in with the likes of a Bivol. I mean, for me, even domestically, the likes of a Callum Johnson, somebody who is seasoned, experienced, they've done hard fights. I think he'd get something from that fight. Or, Gilberto Ramirez is a possible option. I'm just thinking, we don't know what's happening at the minute. Belts are tied up with Smith and Beterbiev. There's the whole Anthony Yard situation. So unless you can get Bivol over, but really that's ultimately in Canelo's hands, which is a bit bizarre after a loss. I think it could be the perfect opportunity for Buatsi to take another 1 or 2 fights.
I would do. I would put him back in another big domestic scrap. I know it won't happen, but ideally, somebody like an Anthony Yard would be good for him. Callum Johnson would be tough, as in Callum Johnson would always be dangerous because he's so powerful. But he needs to be in those levels of fights, because people say, I've heard people say, because they didn't have that statement win and they've been in a tough domestic fight, that's it, they're not world level. But that gives them the experience. Look at the likes of Carl Froch. Anthony Joshua, Ricky Burns. They all had tough domestic fights before they went and had success at world level, and I think that gives you the experience to move on. Gilberto Ramirez is Zula Ramirez. He's a great shout. I think he's something daft like 44-0. Yeah, and I think Golden Boy work really, really well with the zone. They've got a good relationship there, so why not bring him over? There's some good options for Buatsi, but that's what he needs. Failing that, I wouldn't be surprised if, because he's working with Virgil Hunter, why not take advantage of that and get on a Bill stateside and build an experience there. Because Bivol could. I know Craig Richards did well against him, but don't forget Bivol didn't get out of second gear for that fight. So don't let that fool people. That's what I would say about Bivol. I think he's deceptively good, and I think people underrate. So Buatsi needs a lot more experience before he's ready to come to be take on Bivol.
No, I couldn't agree more, mate. I mean, we'll move down the card one. Chantel Cameron, obviously, in with a seasoned operator last night in Bustos. We've seen her, obviously, she's been in with Katie Taylor and many more, obviously, on the losing side.
Yeah.
Now, for me, Chantel Cameron last night, she got the shutout victory on all three cards. So it was dominant from her. But again, possibly controversially for me, Ray, it was almost like she didn't look up for it. Obviously, she entered this road to undisputed tournament. The Reese fight's not come off due to medical reasons, but it's all a little bit sketchy as to what those medical reasons actually are. Does she need that fight next now? Because we didn't learn anything about Chantel Cameron last night. She displayed everything she does. Her head movement was brilliant on the way in. Shot selection was good and varied as it always is. I'm a little bit worried about Chantel Cameron now.
I don't know if I would be worried in the sense that maybe worried about her motivation, because she caused it back, didn't she? But in terms of ability wise, I think the problem with women's boxing is the lack of depth. Because they're either really closely matched or one of them is miles better than the other one. So it looks a bit disjointed. Now, the Reese fight's an excellent fight. I'm not too sure what those medical reasons are. I'm assuming that they're on Reese's side. She had that Kamara fight not so long ago. But that's the fight that Chantel Cameron needs to get a bit in between her teeth. Because that's probably the only fight that she wants to get out of bed for. I don't think she's big enough and imposing enough and has the power enough to make any noise at 147. So it's either this fight or lightweight, and I can't see her being in the list of names to get a big fight with Katie Taylor. So I think you're right, really. I think the Reese fight's the only fight that she can go, and if she doesn't get that fight, perhaps that the motivation may just go because she just seems to be miles better than everyone in the cards.
I couldn't agree more with you, mate. I mean, just there you point on Katie Taylor. Do you think if she managed to get the other belts, become undisputed at 140, does she then go to, for me, she probably would, does she then go towards the top of the list for a Katie Taylor fight? You know, Katie Taylor talks a lot about legacy, and there's an opportunity there to become, two-weight undisputed champion, isn't there, potentially by beating Cameron?
Yeah, there is. It depends what Katie does after potentially the rematch with Serrano. Does she call it a day? Because that fight, I imagine, would be in Ireland, Dublin. So that might be the perfect swan song for Katie Taylor. So if she wants to continue, that's a real clash of that's a real battle of Britain and Ireland, two undisputed champions. That fight could really, really sell. Imagine Eddie Hearn, top table, he would really sell that fight. So she would, in my opinion, because or either that or, I mean, don't forget Jessica Caskill, who Katie Taylor did beat. She's undisputed at 147. So that would be a cracking fight if that fight would come off. But Cameron's got a better chance of beating Katie Taylor than she does with Caskill.
I have to say I do definitely agree. We'll move on. Obviously, Alan Babic, we've seen his Bridgerweight debut against Adam Bulski. Now, this fight was just, in every positive way, it was ridiculous, wasn't it? I mean, we used to seeing Babic's come forward, not really very much boxing involved at all. It's just throwing shots, and he just goes to war, and we're used to seeing that. what we're not as used to seeing is the opponent just fighting fire with fire. And I mean, for those that don't know, Babic did win on points for the first time in his career. So that gives him the WBC silver bridgerweight title. But I mean, just break this one down a little bit for us, Ray. What did you think on this? Because I know you're not the biggest fan of Babic either.
No, I'm not. I just think he's very, very limited. He's very, very gung ho. But because of that, he's very exciting. He started very, very quick in the first round. He kind of literally ran out the blocks from one end of the ring in the center ring. He got caught in an exchange and he got put down in the first round. But then again, his opponent that was the first time I'd seen his opponent. I'm not going to kind of mislead anyone on that, but he boxed quite well at times. He didn't seem scared of Babic one bit. He seemed happy to use his jab, mix up his shots, and he seemed happy to train with Babic. Definitely on the inside. He seemed quite physically strong as well. But there were times when Babic, when he came forward, he looked really vulnerable because he's leaving himself wide open. But he showed little elements of him, trying to box. And that looked quite impressive because he's thinking about his work more and he's selecting his shots a lot better. He just couldn't do it for more than 30 seconds. I think the controversial bit I have to ask you is, what do you make of that shot at the end of round 9 where Victor Lachlan took a point off Buatsi? I mean, I heard the bell. I thought it was on the bell. What did you think? Did you think it was after or not? Because that really rocked Babic.
He definitely rocked Babic, didn't he? To be honest, I actually thought, is that going to be the end? Because Babic, his legs are gone, his eyes were gone. He was in a bad way. It's tough, isn't it? Because I think it probably was after the bell on a replay at the initial time, which in fairness to Buatsi, when he's thrown the shot, I thought it was on the bell. It was only on the replays. I thought, well, that was a touch late. But after 9 rounds of absolute war that those guys had, I'm not going to blame either if their senses are a little bit gone. In fairness, the atmosphere, it was far from a packed O2, but the atmosphere for that fight was very good for obvious reasons. So I thought the point off was a touch harsh, possibly, but it was just, I mean, it's tough, isn't it? Because Babic isn't the cleanest fighter anyway. So
No,
I always think when you get fighters that aren't the cleanest, it then makes it harder for you to then complain and want stuff going your way as well.
Yeah, I think the other thing with Babic though was it was nice to see him at a weight that suited to him. I wasn't buying him at heavyweight, which was another reason why I didn't like him, because the thing with these small heavyweights is once we come against the bigger ones, it really shows in a fight. If we can't get the guy out of there and they can't box or they've got limited boxing skills, it's a hard slog for them. So it's nice to see Babic on a weight that's more suited to him. I still think he's a cruiserweight, but Bridgerweight will do me. Do I think he's ready for the Bridgerweight champion Rivas? No, I don't. I'm going to be controversial though. I'd probably like to see him in with a cruiserweight next. Why not put him in there with a Chris Smith, or put him in with one of the up and coming cruiserweights? There's a few out there. I mean, Jack Massey's been on this show. That'll actually be quite a big fight. I know Jack's got other aspirations, but look, if Babic thinks he can make a lot of noise at world level, then technically you could argue he should be getting rid of people like Jack and Chris Smith and etc. And I would like to see him in with cruiserweights that can move, because then I want to see how he cuts down the ring and how he uses his ring IQ.
See, controversial again, but I think he'd get embarrassed by the likes of a Jack Massey or Chris Smith, because he can't cut the ring off, can he? In the nicest way possible. And I respect what he's achieved in the sport so far, particularly when you say he really is a blown up cruiserweight, knocking heavyweights out.
He is.
But his boxing ability is very limited. The only thing that I do think possibly would work in his favour in a potential Oscar Rivas fight is the fact that when Dylan White fought Oscar Rivas, and I know people will be in the comment section saying, failed drugs test and all the rest of it, so don't bother putting that comment if you were going to. But I think Rivas really didn't like when Dylan White roughed him up and was like on
Yes,
him and pressuring him. Now,
yes.
don't get me wrong, Dylan White's a natural heavyweight. Rivas isn't the biggest heavyweight, hence obviously the Bridgerweight drop. And obviously neither's Babic. But I do think that there is, for as good a fighter as Oscar Rivas is, that blueprint has actually been laid now. And, you know, that for me does give Babic, I'm not going to say he's the favourite for the fight at all because he's not. But I definitely think it gives him more of a chance than it probably, it would have previously.
The only thing I would say with Babbage is he hasn't got the physical strength that Dillian White has. And that's what I mean. He doesn't have for the style of boxing he doesn't have the stature or the physique to do that quite well. So he has to rely on a plan B, and unfortunately he hasn't got one. And yeah, you're right. Cruiserweights probably would humiliate him in the ring, but that's the only way because it's not going to work against the bigger, physically stronger fighters. But that's probably the only way we're going to see how he's going to develop there. But that's the thing, Marlon Babbage. He's exciting, but he's very limited.
No, definitely. Now we'll move on to someone else who was quite exciting for me last night. Anyway, Ellie Scottney. Obviously, she was in with Maria Cecilia Roman, who most British fans will definitely remember from back in March, losing to Ebony Bridges for Ebony Bridges' world title fight.
Yeah.
Now, how impressive was Ellie Scottney last night? Because for me, I mean, I'm going to steal your point because we were messaging while the card was on.
Yeah, as always, yeah.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Scottney beat with ease somebody who Bridges struggled with for me.
Yeah. I felt as though she beat it was the Ellie Scottney's a super bantamweight and Roman was a bantamweight, but nevertheless is still a world champion that I think effectively she beat effortlessly. Whereas Ebony Bridges needed to go put in some effort to beat Roman. It wasn't as convincing as what Ellie Scottney was last night. And I just thought Ellie Scottney would look the class above, really, a former world champion. She just moved so well. Her punch is flawed. Her ring craft's there. Her ring IQ's there, and her footwork's brilliant. She just seems to be getting better every time I see her. I know people talk about a lack of power, but when you've got those set of skills and you can put it together really well, and your defense is on point as well, you're only going one way, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, people have that same conversation about Katie Taylor. Here we are. She's just beaten Amanda Serrano, and I don't think she'll be looking at herself thinking, oh, if I could just have a bit more power, will she? So I'd agree there. I mean, on this channel, we've long been banging on about Ellie Scottney being an absolute talent. Yeah, so really, really excited to see her move to 5-0. And I'm going to put it out there, whether it's next, if not certainly by the end of this year, I'd love to see her get a world title shot this year.
I think, we've still got plenty of time within the year, but why not? That's the other aspect of women's boxing. Like I was saying, there's a lack of depth. And sometimes it leads to classic fights like you were saying last night. Sometimes it leads to poor fights, but what it does also lead to, a bit like the really lower weights in men's boxing, like the flyweights, etc., super fly, straw weights, is you can accelerate the world title fight really, really quickly because there isn't that depth of opposition. However, Ellie Scottney, in my opinion, would get there anyway because of her ability. And when you're doing that, a former world champion who was a valid world champion, yes, you're correct. Why not get that world title fight this year? Why not? She's got the ability to. I don't think she'll be disgraced in there. In fact, depending on which direction they take her, in the rankings, I'm pretty sure she'll probably be starter's favourite. She's that good.
Yeah, I agree, mate. We'll move on to the last fight on the main card. Now, me and you disagree on this, although I am going to just defend myself before we get into it. I've rewatched the highlights this morning, and there's a couple of rounds possibly actually that I gave one way. Now I'm thinking, maybe do I give it the other? For those that haven't guessed, obviously that's Robbie Davis Jr. versus Javier Molina. Now, we were messaging while the fight was on. Ray thought Molina won it quite handily. I'll be honest, I had it 96-94 on the night for Robbie Davis Jr., just on the basis that I like a pressure fighter who's trying to make things happen, and he did that. Ray, break us down the fight and tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I think for me it was Melila started the fight really, really sharp, really, really well using the jab. He, he used a lot of lateral movement, and he couldn't miss. I think with a right hand over the top, or the counter left hook. I thought he boxed really, really classy. There were times when I think the way it went for me was Molina started to course the fight for the first 5-6 rounds, and then he probably took his foot off the gas. He probably had what I call a Jack Catterall moment where he probably thought, I've done this here, took the foot off the gas. And because Robbie Davis was coming with that pressure, it probably looked on the eye more effective than it actually was, because Molina wasn't doing as much work. His engine had started to slow down a bit. But you could argue, probably what you would suggest is Robbie Davis's pressure was probably too much for Molina. He was getting tired, he was getting exhausted, so his punch output wasn't as good, which is probably why Davies started to look as though he's winning those rounds. I just thought when they were exchanging, in the exchanges, Molina was coming off the better. There were times when Davies was rocked to his heels a little bit, and at one point, I'm sure Shane McGuigan was going to throw in the towel.
He was.
I'm sure he was going to throw in the towel.
I think it was in the 8th.
Yeah, that was right. And then he got to the end of the round. He calmed them down. Shane McGuigan's really good at that. He's really good at bringing the tempo down and just calming you down in that corner. Into fair play to Robbie. He came back out. He didn't look like he was going to get stopped again. He got back into the fight and he got back into his rhythm. So that's how I broke it down. But how about yourself? What do you think of Davies' aggression throughout the fight?
Well, we've had this debate before, and that's what I like to say. While I can respect boxing skills and those sort of chess matchy fights, at the same time, I like someone who's going to come forward, bring pressure.
More exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The excitement. That's it's what sells tickets, but it's what sells pay-per-views or nowadays DAZN subscriptions. And I think Robbie Davis Jr. brought that. I do think at times, particularly early on, as you say, Davis was guilty of more fighting Molina's fight, which I know we were, again, on messaging, we were like, that's a bit bizarre. But for me, with Molina, I just thought as the fight wore on, he got tired. He was throwing himself on the floor far too easily and far too often. And again, stuff like that for me, I absolutely hate stuff like that. So I'm like, I'd be the worst judge in the world, because as soon as I start seeing stuff like that, it doesn't take a lot for me to then right, the round goes the other way.
It's like time wasting, isn't it? It's a bit like diving in football. It's not needed.
Exactly, and I thought particularly, I think it was in the 9th or 10th, one of them anyway, I can't remember which one, I do apologise. But I think, Davies Jr. got him backed up to the ropes, was starting to land shots, and there was a potential opening there for him to do some damage, and who knows, maybe get towards a stoppage. Or I'm not saying that would have happened, but the opening was there. And next thing, Molina's throwing himself on the floor. And I just, when you're despoiling your opponent's work in a boxing sense, and there's quite literally just spoiling your opponent's work. And I thought that was what Molina was guilty of last night. So like I said, I had it 96-94 to Robbie Davis Jr., but I've watched bits of it again this morning ahead of this video, and I do think, maybe a couple of the earlier rounds that I had thought were a bit 50-50, they are probably Molina. So I don't know, but what we're learning off Robbie Davis Jr. is that he's going to have his limitations in the pro game. I don't think he's going to be someone 100%. Who's going to go and win a world title. So for me, I'm going to just call it. I wouldn't mind seeing the rematch.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind either. I wouldn't mind. I think because Molina's been in with some good kids, He's been in with that Jose Zepeda, he's been in with Jamal James. And he came into this fight losing his last two. Robbie Davis, I think he had that win against Hank Lundy, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I know he had that win last time out, but so he had the defeat last time out against Carlos Valenzuela, but for a lot of that fight, he fought as a southpaw, and he was with Brandon England at the time, and that was really, really confusing. But nevertheless, yeah, I would love to see this rematch. I would love to see how it pan out. I thought Molina nearly stopped him, nearly got him out of there, and probably Molina would probably realise that and have the experience to capitalise on that in a rematch. Feeling that though, I would like to see him in with. There's some good domestic level fights for him. The Jack Catwell fight is good fight for him because Jack's not going to get the world title shot again. But Robbie Davis isn't even the best of Britain in 140. There's a good Liverpool bout with Sam Maxwell that he could have. That'd be a good derby. You know, Ahara Davis rematch. If Davies can get past Lewis Ritson, and then there's McKenna who lost against Regis Progre. So there's lots of still options for him because at the end of the day he's won. There's still options for him, but I think the rematch would be good because it's got the controversy you could sell, and it it'll be interesting to see how it goes second time round.
I was going to say, and in fairness to Robbie Davis Jr., after the fight in his interview, he didn't think he'd won either. You could tell that when it was announced.
Yeah.
He said, "Look,
you tell his body language."
You could see he didn't, and then Eddie Hearn, no, you're being harsh on yourself. So maybe he'll watch it back and feel, no, I did win it, or he might think, oh, okay, I need to. That rematch is more possible. We'll wrap it up there, guys. Thanks for joining us. We've got a lot of great content planned for this next week. So join us on the next one.